my first question is to you. What brings you to NAMM?
Well, that's a good question. No, I've been coming to NAMM pretty much every year since 2005, 2004, 2005. It's a great place to keep up to date on what's going on. It's kind of an isolated event in the sense that you're working with an artist or a band for days, weeks, months, and that's your contact with the world. And so in this particular instance, you have a bunch of us all in the same place for a couple of days, and you can meet all these people that you know and respect and love and enjoy their work and communicate with them in a real way. And so it's really that and AES are about the only times we get to do this. And so I love doing it, just to, more than anything, just to catch up with everybody and see how they're doing.
That's fantastic. And you're also part of the METAlliance?
Part of the METAlliance. We've been in operation, I think, since 2003 or 2004, something like that. And a bunch of us got together really at the behest of our dear friend and sorely missed Ed Cherney. Came and put this together, just asked a bunch of people that he loved their work and said, you know, when these events happen like AES or NAMM, we generally all get together for lunch or dinner or something like that, and we talk about not so much what's wrong with the industry, but ways that we could improve it. And finally, at one of these dinners, someone suggested, well, you know, if we all got together, maybe we could do something about it. So the main concerns at the time, and still are, the quality of product, especially of, you know, there's so many streaming platforms now, and there are so many ways of delivery and music. Back then, we were concerned mostly about high-end A to Ds and things like that. A lot of that in the market at the time, and a lot of differences between those, and a lot of misinformation about what they did and what they were. So we thought by getting together, we could put our imprimatur, our brand on that, and say, we endorse this, we like this. Yeah. And we decided initially, early on, that unless we were all unanimous in our decision about a product, we wouldn't endorse it. So we had many products that were submitted that didn't make the list, but the few that did, we got on board. We started endorsing. We also were very concerned about education, and we love the fact that there are so many schools out there that are teaching this now for the first time, but in many ways, a school is not a substitute for the old system where you would work in a studio, come in as a floor sweeper, and then move on to an assistant under the tutelage of hopefully a great engineer or a great producer, and learn the tricks of the trade by watching and seeing it being done. It's much better than, you know, someone talking about something on a screen, actually participating about it. So we got very involved in the education aspect. We, for a while, started doing around the country events where we would take a weekend and record a couple of bands and put it all together, soup to nuts. And that was the second part of our mission. So now we've been going for, I don't know, almost more than 20 years, I guess. And when we started, we had Al Schmidt was on board, Phil Ramone was on board, and Ed Cherney. Sadly, we've lost all of them, but they they weren't replaced, but they're still in our psyche and in our mind, but we've added 3 members to cover them. And certainly, like I say, it wasn't a replacement. They had their own extreme talents and their own. But we added Jimmy Douglas and
Fantastic
Nico
guy.
Bolas
Yeah.
and Sylvia Massey. And we're extremely proud and glad to have them on board.
That's fantastic. So I'm going to ask you about what is your first memory of seeing and or hearing about DAD products, and what was your experience when you sort of got to work with them?
Well, I started out for many years. I had my own system, and I was using the Lavery Blues. I had tested those out in the early '90s, I think, and thought they came up were the best sounding preamps at the time, or best sounding A to D converters.
Yeah.
And so I wasn't really interested in looking at for anything, because I thought I had the ultimate system. But DAD came on our radar, and we said, I said, well, I'd be interested in testing it for myself, and the rest of the folks in the METAlliance did as well. Once I connected it to my system, I just said, oh my God. I mean, as I said, I wasn't looking. I thought I had what I needed. But for me, it really changed the ball game. And I didn't realize how great these A to Ds were. And so without really looking for them, I found them, and been a huge fan ever since. So I did something very rare in my life. I actually bought a unit. I don't do that often, So, it's now been the heart of my system for 15 years or so, I think, because I got one of the early ones.
Yeah.
So, about 15 years.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Well, that brings me to one of my other questions, would be, what was the watershed moment for you to actually sort of embrace digital recording and say, like, this is going to be the thing for me? Is there a particular production? Is there a particular, like, that moment where you say, like, this is actually going to work? Because obviously you've seen technology come and go, and at what point did you go, like, this is going to be this? This is kind of how this is going to work.
I didn't have a watershed moment. It was a long process. In fact, early on, I was not happy with digital. I did a couple albums in digital, and 10,000 Maniacs I did in digital, and I started working with a digital 24 track made by Studer, and that was my main machine for recording once that came out. Or was it a 48 track? I think it was a 48 track. Yeah, it was a 48 track. But it was, 16-bit technology or 18-bit technology and so forth. But I really liked the digital format, but I wasn't necessarily wowed by the sonic abilities until the Neve, the Sony, the Studer 48 track came along, and I started working on a Neve Capricorn, one of the first digital consoles. Well, once I connected that Studer digitally into the Neve console, I started getting the kind of results that I had always hoped for. But for me, the real conversion to digital came on a conversation I had with another fabulous engineer, Alan Sides.
Yeah.
We were talking over lunch one day, and I was saying, Alan, I don't listen to my CDs of my projects anymore. as much as I used to when I had an analog disc and a turntable.
Right.
And I said, and I know it's not sound because, let's face it, let's be realistic. Analog turntable, you got a piece of you got a piece of plastic dragging, or a piece of
Basically,
you've got a stone dragging through a
exactly,
piece
right.
of plastic.
Yeah.
So
A piece of sand.
yeah,
essentially.
and it's got some real problems. So it's fun, and I like the concept, but sonically, I was never impressed. Then when I got the CD, I wasn't impressed about that either because there was something in the chain that was missing. And it turns out that over the years, I started to realize that when I'm listening to digital, it doesn't sound the way I had hoped it would sound. But I started to put it together and say, well, that's because I'm mixing off an analog console and then going to a digital transfer and mastering.
Right.
And there's something I'm not hearing, and then when I get the CD, I'm going back and listening in analog of a digital product. So that's the time I decided that the A to D and D to A's were the problem.
Oh, yeah.
That was for me, the digital format was far superior, but getting to that format was what was holding me back. And so I realized the importance of the A to D and the D to A. So I said, here on, once I go digital, I'm never going back to analog. I will not do that. I will not go onto an analog. If I'm coming off a digital tape machine, I'm not going to go into an analog console. And I'm sure as hell not going to go off that analog console, then go into a digital plug-in and come back. This is all crazy. The most difficult part of the process we keep doing over and over again. So I made a decision. Digital storage, digital console, digital mastering. Once I started doing that, once again, I was completely happy with the end result. I started listening to my stuff again, and I was happy for the first time in years, and it all came with that process. Once the Capricorn, which I still found to be, I'd work on a Capricorn today if it could have stayed current, but I love that console. Mm. But once that I grew out of the Capricorn, which would not go 96K,
No.
I started looking for an alternative. I remembered I was working on a Korn album, and we had the opportunity. We spent 9 months on making Untouchables. Every
Great
step
album.
of
Great
every
album.
step of the way, we tested and tested. So the first thing we tested was, are we going to record this album analog or digital? So we spent 3 days at Buddy Brundo's studio. Conway.
Conway, yeah.
Spent 3 days at Conway. A Biden moment, sorry. I spent 3 days at Conway, and I finally, we had analog machines, Studer tape machines, even a few of the old not AKG. What was the Ampex?
Ampex,
Yeah.
yeah.
We also had Pro Tools. We had Nuendo. We had. I was also working in DAD multi-channel at the time, so that was super analog, the DSD. We
Yes.
had all of them there. And we very meticulously had the band out there and recorded to every single one of those devices and played them back. Spent 3 days on it. came up to us at that time. The ultimate system was recording on recording on the euphonics R1.
Right, yeah.
We also had a radar there.
Yeah.
But recording on the euphonics R1 at 96K, using at that time the Lavery Blue converters,
Right.
and then mixing innuendo.
Yeah.
And that was our process. Like I said, once we went digital, we stayed digital. We found that digital was superior to recording the band because of the transient
Right.
response of digital. Once I started on my own, in my own studio working at home, I moved over to Pro Tools, mostly because when Pro Tools went to 32-bit processing,
Right.
I realized that was the first time I could handle or stomach Pro Tools, because
Right.
the old Pro Tools TDM system was not my favorite.
No.
And I did appreciate the superiority from my perspective of the mixing system and the mixing engine in Pro Tools.
Right.
So I ended up moving over to Pro Tools. By chance, got a hold of their digital console, which I put in my home studio, and have been using that process ever since. But it's been an evolution, always looking for the best. I've changed all of this stuff over the years, except for the last 15 years, I haven't changed the DAD. I'm still using the same. So
And we
for
certainly
me,
hope you won't do that anytime soon.
no, well, for me, that's kind of like the heart of my system, isn't
Yeah.
it? I mean, everything goes through there. I have the Pro Tools input. I do all of my stuff. My Dante card is in there, so I'm using that for the Atmos renderer.
Right.
So that's pretty much the heart of my system, and hopefully will remain so.
No, fantastic. Well, thank you for that. We're going to do a little thing, which I'm going to give you 3 cards. One, I'll allow you to take a technical question, a creative question, or a joker. So you hold up a question for me that you will be willing to answer, and I'm going to try and do that. We're going to do 1 or 2 or 3 questions, whatever you want, and then after that we'll do a little Q&A if anyone wants to ask you a question, and we'll just take it from there. So what do you think? Are you up for it? We'll take a creative question. So what's behind door number 1? We'll take a creative question. So what would be a creative question? I've got a few here, right? So I'm going to choose this one. So what's more valuable as an engineer in a mixer? Skill, speed, or patience?
It's not skill.
No.
It is patience. But what was the third one?
Speed.
Speed. And it has nothing to do with it. Although one of the best things that I've ever done in my creative career has been Broadway shows. Because in a Broadway show, you have one day to record the entire show. Vocals, instruments, everything that's
Right.
a part of the show has to be done in one day. And the reason for that is because if I take 2 days, the union rules are that each participant gets paid a week's salary for each additional day.
Yeah.
So the cost is prohibitive. So you do everything in one day. That requires, incredible speed.
Right.
And it gets you used to getting your sounds right away.
But so the interesting thing about that is also that the speed also allows you, if you're like, if you have the speed and the confidence in what you're doing, you get to a point where you can do something like that. You know, you wouldn't be able to do that Broadway show if you didn't have the speed and the confidence.
All of that, yeah, all of that plays in. But if you were going to ask me, the most important thing in doing what I do, it's the ability to listen emotionally, as opposed to listening technically.
Yeah.
There's a big difference between the two. If
Yes.
you listen to a track or a microphone or a speaker, by listening technically, you're gonna get something that over time is not going to be satisfying.
Right.
And what do I mean by listening technically? I mean, if you're listening to the frequency response, or you're listening to the dynamic range of the driver, or you're listening to how it, how quick the transients are, what the slew rate is, all of these technical things, and you listen to each one, because technically it's hard to listen to the whole. When you're listening to the bass frequencies, you're listening to the bass. You're not listening to the other stuff. So you're listening to this and, oh, the bass is sounding good. Oh yeah, I like the transients on that snare. Yeah, I'm getting good depth and all that. Still could be a piece of shit that doesn't affect you, because at the end of the day, what you need is something that you can listen to over and over again and not be awed by the frequency response, but be awed by the emotions that
Right.
it creates inside you.
Yeah.
And that's the difference. If you listen technically to a microphone, and I've done tests with this outside, where I set up 4 microphones, and I tell the people in the audience, I'd say, which of the 4 do you like the best? And they'll say, oh, I like the Neumann 67, or I like the C12 or something. And then I'd say, okay, let's listen back. And now I want you to listen, not technically, not about the frequency response. I want you now to listen to emotionally what the vocal does to you. And I'd play the same tracks back, and I'd then ask the audience, and I'd say, I have an idea of one mic that for me gives me the emotional response I want, but what do you folks think? And oddly enough, and I'm telling you, this is the God's honest truth, almost in every test we did, they agreed with me, because suddenly they heard the emotion of the voice, even though they liked the U47 better sonically, when the human voice being the most expressive instrument of all, sonically they heard emotion in the voice that they didn't hear before, and that suddenly blew them away. Once you have the ability to do that, that's, I think, when you can really do this job.
Fantastic. Or you take one more in whatever category they're interested in.
Technical.
Well, I mean, I'm not going to make them all super technical. One I have under the technical is considering what you and your colleagues in the METAlliance are doing and what you represent as, technical prowess and all the immersion and depth of knowledge that you guys represent. Where do you think that the next METAlliance partners are going to come from? Where, like, in the generation that is like in the 20s now, that may have to do most of the work on a laptop and stuff, the technical part of what you and we all do, where do you think where do you think those people are going to come from? What is it that they need to do to sort of be the stewards of the recording process that is going to help capture all of these emotional things?
It's hard for me to say, because the direction that music is going is different than what I experienced in my lifetime. When I was growing in my job, I was working with bands, and our job was to record them as a unit, or I was working with a Broadway show where I wasn't recording them piece by piece. I had to record them all at once. I was recording with artists who wanted the orchestra with them so they could play with and against and play off each other. That is not happening anymore. And I think it's an art that should be happening. I think it's something that the best of today's engineers could learn from. But I also respect the way they build tracks now. They'll build it in a computer with samples and with all kinds of things at their disposal, and they create some incredible music. The problem is, I can use as an illustration when I was working with Mick Jones in Foreigner, the Foreigner album I did, Agent Provocateur.
Yeah.
We would be recording tracks, and Mick would start doing, once the tracks were done, we'd go into guitar overdub mode. So we'd start recording these overdubs, and what was happening was we'd play the song down as we're doing the overdubs, and we'd build each section, and then when it got to the third chorus, Mick would play a part, and he'd say, let's try that again, play another thing. I got it. Now I know what I want. That chorus is the good chorus. I want to go back and fix choruses 1 and 2 and put the same part down. I understand why that was done, because now it came closer to what was in his head. I felt personally that it lost something in the fact that he was building, when we were recording from the beginning, he was building a part as the song went on. And that meant that the first chorus, second chorus, third chorus kept developing and moving in an emotional arc. And when we did it the other way, I guess for the radio it was good because the first chorus hit with more balls, but it didn't have the same emotional arc as a song.
Right.
So I think the problem with today's records is that's not even a concept. You put the vocals that are in the first chorus in the second chorus, and then the third, that's just a matter. And the loop that's in the first part of the song is a loop that's in the last. And they may build and add instruments, but it hasn't developed. It hasn't changed from microsecond to microsecond.
Right,
It's
exactly.
now something that becomes static and is musical and does all the things it's supposed to do, but it isn't emotionally as satisfying. So I think from that perspective, I think I can learn a lot from these folks about what they do. I also think these young kids can learn a hell of a lot for what we did, learning how to record a group together, because adding a guitar part, then adding the keyboard part, and then adding the whatever it happens to be is not the same as them going down, because as the guitar player is playing, he's vibing the keyboard player, who suddenly changes the way he plays, and they're vibing the drummer, who suddenly changes the way he plays, and suddenly you've got what is instrumental communication.
It's communal, right?
It's communal, and it's a vibe, and there's nothing like being in the studio after working on a song, and they run down a song, and everybody in the room knows that's the take.
Right.
There's no question about it. Hey, we got it.
Yeah.
I don't have to say it to anybody. They all know it. I know it. There's nothing like that feeling. And it's a totally different feeling from putting a song together piece by piece and making all the parts right. It's not the same. So there's something to be learned from that.
Fantastic. Now, I'm not going to ask you to do one of these, but I have a personal one that I want to ask you, which is, as someone who is incredibly good at what you do and have been for a long, long time, what do you personally think is the record that you worked on that represents at the time, or maybe in perpetuity, the thing that is like, this represents the pinnacle of what I can do technically, emotionally, creatively? Which is the one that you will hold up and say, I nailed it on that one? Which record would that be if you had to choose one?
Well, there's a few that I feel that I've nailed very favorably and fondly. I remember James Taylor's Hourglass. I remember working with Carly Simon on so many albums that she's done. Recording and mixing Frank Zappa's 200 Motels at Disney Hall here in LA for the 10th anniversary of Disney Hall. The Pavarotti and Friends shows I used to do, and also in Italy, Modena, Italy. Wicked, Broadway, The Book of Mormon. That was fascinating. The Color Purple. I've had the privilege of awe-inspiring moments to me, not necessarily me doing something to someone else, but awe-inspiring moments to me, listening to stars in raw form before they became stars, of hearing music for the first, I Want to Know What Love Is, hearing that for the first time in its raw form. That kind of thing, they're all pinnacles. They're all privileges that I've had to experience while doing this.
What an incredible answer. Frank, thank you so much for your time. Do we have time for anyone have a question maybe? If not, that was absolutely fantastic.
Do you miss the old analog sound in any way, or do you think digital
No.
has hit that mark in your vision?
Bob Clearmountain and I have had this discussion several times. On panels, we would say, people would ask about analog versus digital, and they'd say, don't you miss the analog sound coming off the multi-track? And Bob and I both would look at each other and say, I never liked analog. It's not like I didn't, like I loved analog. I hated analog. I'm a drummer, okay? When I went out and recorded the drums and then came back in the control room, I hated what it did to the drums. It cut off the front end,
Right.
okay? It took it kind of mushed things together, and there was no transients, and then everything faded off into hiss, and I hated it. And I would record a band. I'd be out there with Kiss, and we'd record a track, and I'd actually run into the studio. Guys, this was fantastic. Come on in and listen. Bring them into the studio. And what came back was like 70% of what I heard while it was going down.
Right.
So I always hated analog. Once we got to digital storage, I realized that you have to work with digital, but not in the same way as analog. And in digital, the transients come through with flying colors. But you can't, because those transients are maybe 10 or 15 dB over what you get with analog, suddenly now it sounds drier.
Right.
It's not because digital is making it drier, it's because digital has a transient 15 dB louder. You got to bring the whole track down to compensate, and then everything sounds smaller and drier.
Right.
That's not digital's fault.
No.
That's the nature of the format.
Yeah.
So when you work in the format, you learn that that's one of the things it's going to do. But the great thing is, with digital as opposed to analog, when you play it back, it's the same thing, okay? So whatever I hear through my console as I'm working on it, I know it's going to play back the same way when they come into the room. But even better than that, I know it's going to sound the same way tomorrow. I know it's going to sound the same way a week from there. We used to go in, when we were doing Agent Provocateur, we took 9 months to make that record. I guarantee you, the tracks that we had the first week sounds nothing like the tracks we played back for the mix. Every time it went across the magnetic record and playback head, you lost something.
You lost something.
And
every
you
single
kept
time.
losing, and you kept losing. That's why we started making. We actually made a copy of the tracks, and then put the tape in storage just so we didn't have to deal with. Analog is so fucked. I'm telling you, there's so many things wrong with it. It's when you think about mechanical motion and a cantilever on a turntable, you've got this rock that then goes on a lever that then goes through the cantilever, and then there's two magnets on either side, and it's picking that up, and the thing's going up and down and left and right. Now this is one lever, and it's going this way and this way.
Yeah.
You're telling me that mechanically there's no crosstalk there?
All right.
Give me a break.
Of course.
So all of this stuff then gets transferred into something and squiggles on another piece of plastic.
Right.
And now that's supposed to be a phenomenal way of listening? You guys got to be on some planet that I'm not on. So for me, analog has always been, we did incredible stuff with it to get to where it was. No question about it.
Yeah.
But like 5 years after digital came into being, everybody's saying, oh, it sucks, it sucks. No, it took 50 years before analog didn't suck,
Yeah.
okay? Analog sounded good, but it took 50 years to get to that point.
Right.
Now, in our 30th year of digital, it's already so far ahead of what we had with analog that it's ridiculous, and it's only going to get better.
And with those words, we're going to say thank you so much, Frank. It's been an honor and a pleasure. Thank you for your insight. And you've said 5 things I'm going to make into T-shirts. One of them being analog sucks.
All right, so
Frank Filipetti.
that's I have 2 mantras: analog sucks and fuck fear. That's it. In your lifetime, say fuck fear, because that's the only thing that stops you from doing what you want to do.
Thank you so much, Frank.